It was a woman's voice, low, distant, and sorrowful, calling a name he didn't know. Outside, the water shimmered like glass, and for just a moment, he thought he saw someone standing on the rocks below, looking up at him. Then the fog swallowed her whole. Chapter 1. Light on the Water. The ocean breathed softly that night, a slow, endless sigh beneath the pale wash of stars. Gray harbor lay wrapped in mist, the wooden homes huddled together as if for warmth, chimneys curling wisps of smoke into the heavy air. The tide whispered secrets against the cliffs, a low, lapping lullaby that stretched across the quiet town. Inside the lighthouse, a single lamp glimmered against the dark. Lance Wheeling, the keeper, leaned over the brass railing and let his gaze wander across the rolling silver waves. 32 years old, steady as the tide, he had watched this horizon for nearly a decade. The sea had taken much from him, his father, in a winter storm, and left him with the weight of silence, but it had also given him a purpose. Every night he performed the same ritual, polishing the lantern glass until it gleamed like captured moonlight, whispering the old words his father had taught him. Light must never fail the lost. The flame was more than a tool. It was a lifeline, a bridge between the safety of shore and the perilous dark beyond. From the spiral stairs came the faint scratch of his boots, mingling with the subtle hum of the wind through the tower. Below, the harbor stretched like an endless sheet of liquid silver, reflecting the faint glow of distant homes. Sometimes, Lance imagined the ships beyond the horizon catching his light, sailors reading it like a secret message carried by the waves. By the window, a small journal lay open, filled with sketches of the sea and short, clipped lines of poetry. He wrote quietly, almost like someone speaking to the ocean itself. The pen scratched against the paper, the rhythm echoing the faint heartbeat of the town. That evening, the air felt different, denser, heavier with salt, as if the ocean itself had something to say. As Lance ascended the spiral stairs toward the lantern room, a shiver ran down his spine. The wind pushed harder, rattling the old panes, and for the first time in years, he thought he heard something beyond the surf. A voice. It was soft, almost like a melody carried across the water. Lance froze mid-step, listening. The sound rose and fell with the rhythm of the waves, gentle and certain, haunting yet beautiful. He shook his head, telling himself it was only the wind, and yet the sense of being observed lingered. He reached the lantern room and lit the great lamp. The flames swelled, spreading warmth through the polished glass, bathing the tower in amber light. Outside, the sea caught the glow, stretching gold and fire across the dark, restless water. Then it happened. The lantern flickered, not once, not twice, but in a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if something unseen breathed against it. Lance adjusted the valve, checked the wick, but everything was in perfect order. And then the voice came again, clearer now, a woman's voice, soft and distant, sorrowful, calling a name he didn't know. The light steadied, glowing with familiar warmth, but Lance felt his chest tighten. He moved closer to the edge, peering through the fog that clung to the cliffs below. For a fleeting instant, he thought he saw someone standing on the rocks below, looking up at him. Then the fog swallowed her whole. Chapter 2. The Quiet Watch. Morning came slowly over Gray Harbor, spilling pale gold across the misty water. The town awoke quietly, the faint clatter of shutters and the soft creak of wooden porches mixing with the gulls' distant cries. Lance Wheeling, as always, was already at the lantern tower, running his morning inspection. He checked the wick, polished the brass fittings, and adjusted the valve to ensure the lamp's light would stretch far over the bay. The events of the previous night lingered at the edge of his mind, yet he buried them beneath routine. After all, the sea demanded no hesitation. The harbor itself seemed untouched by mystery, peaceful in its rhythm. Small boats bobbed lazily against their moorings, nets drying in the sun, and the occasional fisherman's shout carried softly across the water. Lance could hear it all from his perch, high in the tower, the town's heartbeat mingling with the quiet pulse of the sea. After ensuring the lamp was steady and secure, he descended the spiral stairs to the keeper's quarters below. The room smelled faintly of kerosene, salt, and old wood, a comforting combination that reminded him of his childhood summers spent running along the cliffside with his father. On the table lay a loaf of fresh bread from Mrs. Callahan's bakery, a gift left the night before. Lance sliced it slowly, savoring the texture and the warmth of the simple meal. His thoughts drifted out the open window toward the harbor. Mid-morning, a small rowboat appeared, cutting through the fog like a dark shadow. It carried a solitary figure, a young woman carrying a basket of laundry and a bundle of herbs for her mother. This was Elsie Harper, the miller's daughter, who often walked the pier to deliver goods or collect news from the town. She greeted Lance with a wave and a soft smile. He returned it, nodding, though he rarely spoke beyond necessary pleasantries. "The fog lifted faster than I expected," she said, tying her shawl tightly. "It looked like it wanted to swallow the whole harbor last night." "Yes," Lance replied, his voice quiet. "It does that sometimes. The sea likes to remind us who's in charge." They spoke little more. Words were not often needed between them. The rhythm of Gray Harbor itself seemed enough to connect people. Yet Elsie lingered a moment, glancing up at the lantern tower. Her eyes seemed to search for something beyond the glass and brass, something invisible to all but those attuned to the subtle movements of the harbor. Lance looked away, returning to his duties, but he noticed her gaze linger on him longer than necessary. By noon, the fog had fully retreated, revealing the sharp cliffs and jagged rocks below. The waves sparkled in the sun, 1,000 points of reflected light dancing in constant motion. Lance took this time to climb the cliffs at the edge of the harbor, walking slowly along the narrow paths that overlooked the water. He had learned to know every curve of the rocks, every hidden pool, and every cluster of barnacles clinging to the stone. The sea had a language here, subtle but precise, and he had spent years learning to read it. It was during these walks that he often thought of the stories his father told him. Tales of sailors lost in storms, of ships guided home by lanterns like the one he now tended, and of the quiet magic inherent in patience and observation. The older he grew, the more he understood that keeping the light steady was not merely a duty. It was a meditation, a way of listening to the pulse of the world. That afternoon, a sudden breeze brought with it the scent of pine and distant rain, and Lance paused, leaning against a weathered boulder. The harbor was alive with color and movement, children splashing in the shallow waves, gulls diving to snatch fish, and the distant hum of the mill at work. Yet underneath it all, the same slow, eternal rhythm persisted. The ebb and flow of tides, the quiet breathing of water against stone. Returning to the tower, Lance found his small journal waiting for him on the desk. He opened it carefully, adding sketches of the cliffs and notes about the currents. Each line was precise yet gentle, capturing not just facts, but the feeling of being present in this place, of witnessing the slow dance of light and water. As evening drew near, he lit the lantern again, watching the golden beam stretch across the harbor. The sky blushed with muted pinks and purples, the fog creeping slowly over the water. The town below settled into quiet routines, lamps glowing faintly in windows, shutters closed one by one, and the occasional sound of footsteps on wooden planks fading into the distance. From his perch, he felt a deep sense of calm, as though he were not merely a keeper of light, but a witness to time itself, flowing gently and endlessly around him. The events of the previous night, the mysterious voice, the fleeting figure, remained unspoken, set aside like driftwood on the shore. Tonight there was only the light, the water, and the slow, measured heartbeat of Gray Harbor. He leaned against the railing, inhaled the cool, salty air, and let his thoughts drift with the tide. Somewhere beyond the horizon, ships moved silently, guided by the same light he had tended for years. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 3. Evening Currents. The harbor's rhythm had a way of seeping into everything. By late afternoon, the sun hung low over the water, casting long reflections that rippled like liquid gold. Lance Wheeling walked along the pier, boots creaking against the worn planks, the salty wind tugging at his coat. He paused to watch the small waves brushing against the wooden supports, each one a tiny, shining promise of the evening to come. Children played at the edge of the harbor, tossing smooth stones into the water and laughing when the ripples chased one another across the surface. Their voices were light, playful, and fleeting, much like the gulls wheeling above them. Lance paused, allowing the scene to fill him with a quiet warmth. He had spent years among the solitude of waves and light, yet the presence of simple life reminded him why he remained here. Gray Harbor, for all its fog and mystery, was a place alive with gentle beauty. The wind shifted, carrying scents from the cliffs, pine needles, wet stone, and the faintest hint of smoke from the town's chimneys. He inhaled deeply, savoring the mixture. He had learned that the small details, the subtle smells, the faintest sounds were as telling as any map or chart when understanding this place. They spoke of storms past and seasons turning, of lives quietly unfolding in rhythm with the sea. At the old mill at the far end of the harbor, he saw Elsie Harper tending to a bundle of laundry, the sunlight glinting off the damp fabric as she spread it on the line. She looked up and waved, and Lance nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. They rarely spoke for long, but these brief exchanges had become part of the pattern of his days. Returning toward the lighthouse, he took the narrow cliffside path, each step carefully chosen to avoid loose stones. The harbor below shimmered with the late afternoon light, and the waves seemed to hum softly against the rocks. He paused halfway, leaning on a weathered boulder, letting the wind play through his hair, and listening to the subtle whispers of water and tide. This was the kind of quiet that allowed reflection without distraction, the kind of silence that encouraged thought without urgency. At the lighthouse, he spent the next hour tending to small repairs. He polished brass fittings until they gleamed, oiled the hinges of the lantern room, and ensured that the lens would capture the light for miles across the harbor. His hands worked methodically, almost meditatively, the rhythm of labor matching the rhythm of the sea. It was in these moments, performing quiet, precise tasks, that Lance felt most connected to his purpose. As evening deepened, the town below settled into its own quiet routine. Lamps glimmered faintly in windows, the soft murmur of voices drifted across the harbor, and the occasional sound of a horse's hoofs on cobblestones broke the pervasive calm. The harbor itself reflected these movements, water catching the warm glow, then letting it go, then catching it again. It was a dance of light and life that Lance had observed countless times, yet it never lost its ability to soothe. When the first star appeared above the cliffs, he lit the lantern once more. The flame expanded slowly, pushing shadows back from the corners of the room and spilling amber across the polished floor. Outside, the light cut through the creeping fog, stretching across the water and painting the harbor in warm, unwavering tones. The wind played gently with the tower's ropes, and somewhere in the distance, a gull cried, its echo swallowed by the soft lap of waves. Lance leaned on the railing, journal in hand, and recorded observations about the tide, the subtle currents, and the patterns of light on the water. His notes were meticulous but poetic, capturing not only measurements but sensations, the gentle tug of the sea, the warmth of light on metal, and the quiet presence of the town as it rested. Later, as darkness settled fully, he moved to the window to watch the fog thicken, softening the outlines of boats and buildings alike. The town was calm, and the water was calm, and yet the lighthouse stood as a steady sentinel, its light unwavering. Lance felt the rhythm of this place settle into him, like a heartbeat in sync with his own. The night carried a profound stillness, a sense that time itself had slowed to accommodate the harbor's gentle pulse. Lance leaned back, hands resting on the railing, and allowed himself to simply listen to the whisper of waves, to the distant sounds of the town, and to the quiet murmur of wind threading through the cliffs. These were the moments he cherished most, the soft, inevitable passage of time witnessed in solitude, yet alive with the presence of the world around him. Gray Harbor slept beneath the lantern's glow, and Lance Wheeling, the keeper, watched over it all, the calm of the evening flowing into him like a slow, soothing tide. Chapter 4. Tides of Memory. The morning mist hung low over Gray Harbor, curling around the pier and spilling into the narrow alleys between the wooden homes. Lance Wheeling emerged from the lighthouse, boots soft against the wet planks, and inhaled the crisp, briny air. The harbor had a rhythm of its own, and he felt it echo through his chest, the gentle pull of the tide, the whisper of wind across the cliffs, the soft creak of ropes as boats shifted with the current. Today, the harbor seemed unusually quiet. The gulls circled lazily above the water, their cries distant, and the usual bustle of fishermen preparing nets for the morning catch was absent. He found it peaceful, though a part of him noticed the stillness. He walked to the edge of the pier, hands resting on the worn wooden railing, and traced the movements of the water as it curved around the moored vessels. Every swell and ripple felt deliberate, as if the sea itself were keeping time with something hidden beneath its surface. By mid-morning, a small rowboat appeared, cutting a path through the mist. It was the miller's daughter, Elsie Harper, carrying a bundle of herbs and linens for her mother. She waved as she neared the pier, her figure half hidden by fog, and Lance lifted a hand in return. Though their exchanges were always brief, he had come to rely on the sense of familiarity she brought, her presence a quiet anchor in the harbor's ebb and flow. "Good morning, Lance," she said softly, setting the bundle down on the dock. "The fog has eased a bit, but it looks like more will roll in later." "Yes," he replied, scanning the horizon. "It seems the sea has its own schedule today." The two shared a quiet nod before turning to their separate routines. Lance moved toward the cliffs, a notebook tucked under his arm, noting the angles of sunlight on the waves, the pattern of tide against rock, and the subtle variations in wind that hinted at changes to come. Each observation was recorded with care, not just measurements, but the feeling of being present in the world, of witnessing the delicate balance of nature and human life coexisting quietly. He paused at his usual spot on the cliffs, overlooking the harbor. The fog had shifted, revealing small clusters of homes and the gentle sway of boats tethered to the docks. He could hear the faint hammering of the blacksmith in the distance, the soft clatter of shutters, and the laughter of children playing near the water. Everything moved slowly, in its own time, yet the rhythm felt comforting, an unbroken chain linking past, present, and what would come next. As the day stretched on, Lance returned to the lighthouse to inspect the lantern. He cleaned the glass carefully, polished the brass fittings, and adjusted the mechanism until the lamp glowed with steady warmth. Sitting at his desk, he opened his journal and sketched the harbor from memory, adding notes about tide levels and wind currents. He often drew what he observed not just with his eyes, but with his senses. The way sunlight bent over the water, the smell of salt and pine mingling in the air, the gentle tremor of waves against the pier. As afternoon drifted toward evening, and the fog began to roll back in, softening the edges of buildings and boats, Lance climbed the spiral stairs once more to the lantern room, watching as shadows lengthened across the water. He lit the lamp, the flame spreading slowly and steadily, spilling warm amber light across the harbor. The glow caught the tops of waves, illuminating each ripple and crease, as if painting the sea itself in gold. From his vantage point, he noticed small details: a pair of seagulls circling above the pier, a lone fisherman returning with an empty net, the soft sway of the smallest boats against the docks. Everything was part of a delicate balance, each movement and sound a note in the quiet symphony of Gray Harbor. As night fell, the town settled further into stillness. Lamps flickered to life in the homes along the water, and the occasional creak of shutters punctuated the silence. Lance leaned against the railing, hands resting on the cool brass, and let the rhythm of the night carry him. He thought of his father, of long-gone winters spent learning the ways of the harbor, of countless nights spent tending the lantern. He felt the continuity of it all, the subtle yet undeniable pulse that bound past to present. The waves whispered against the rocks, a soft, constant sound, and the fog thickened, blurring the edges of the town. Lance's gaze lingered on the horizon, imagining distant ships tracing invisible paths, guided by the light of Gray Harbor. The lantern stood steady, a single point of warmth and safety in the vast quiet, and he let the moments settle over him like a soft blanket. For Lance Wheeling, nights like this were what made the harbor his home. The balance of water, wind, light, and quiet human life, all moving together in gentle harmony. Here, in the midst of the calm and the gentle rhythm of the sea, he was exactly where he needed to be. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Past. The fog lingered longer than usual that morning, curling like smoke around the harbor's edges and softening the outlines of boats and buildings. Lance Wheeling stepped out onto the pier, boots sinking slightly into the damp wood, and took a slow breath. The scent of salt, wet earth, and pine filled the air, and he let it settle in his lungs, a quiet reminder of the rhythms he had come to know so well. Gray Harbor moved at its own pace, gentle yet deliberate. From the mill, the faint creak of wheels turning drifted over the water. Seagulls circled lazily, their cries blending with the whisper of waves against the rocks. Even the children playing near the water seemed to adopt the town's unhurried tempo, tossing pebbles into the tide and laughing softly, as if mindful of the quiet world around them. Lance made his way toward the cliffs, notebook tucked beneath his arm, and observed the small details he had long learned to read. The tide had shifted slightly overnight, leaving tiny pools that reflected the pale light of the morning. Barnacles clung to the rocks, glistening as the water receded. He knelt to examine them, noting how the patterns of the shells marked the ebb and flow of the harbor's movements over time. Each detail was a story, quiet and patient, waiting to be read. By mid-morning, Elsie Harper appeared at the end of the pier, carrying a basket of fresh herbs and a bundle of letters bound by twine. She waved to Lance, and he returned the gesture with a faint smile. "You've been busy with your observations again?" she asked lightly. "I try to keep track," he said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "The harbor has its own language. It speaks if you're willing to listen." Elsie's eyes followed him as he moved closer to the lighthouse. She often walked with him for a while, though their conversation was usually quiet, shared through glances and gestures rather than words. Today, she held out the bundle of letters. "From the town?" he asked. "Yes, mostly orders and some old notes for the lantern's log, but there's one addressed to you." Lance took the envelope with care, feeling the faint weight of history in the paper. He opened it slowly, reading the neat, looping handwriting. It was a note from the previous keeper of the lighthouse, long retired, describing the ebb and flow of tides, the patterns of fog, and observations of ships that had passed through the harbor decades ago. The words felt alive, as though the former keeper were present, guiding him across the years. Lance's gaze lifted from the letter to the water beyond. Gray Harbor had always carried the weight of memory, not just in the structures of its docks and mills, but in the pulse of its tides, the rise and fall of fog, the flicker of light on the waves. He often wondered about the lives that had come before him, the quiet devotion of keepers long past, the sailors who had glimpsed the lantern from miles away and turned safely home. The afternoon sun stretched across the water, painting the harbor in muted shades of gold and gray. Lance climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room, the letters tucked safely under his arm. He paused at each landing, taking in the view of the harbor bathed in gentle light, the fishing boats rocking gently, the seagulls dipping low, the distant mill wheel turning in rhythm with the waves. Lighting the lantern, he watched the flame bloom, warm and steady, filling the room with amber glow. Outside, the water shimmered with reflections of gold and silver, moving in gentle harmony with the tide. Lance set the letters carefully on his desk, next to his journal, and sat for a while in quiet reflection. He thought of his father and the keeper before him, of the countless nights spent tending the lantern, of the small, patient acts that had kept ships safe for generations. There was a rhythm to it, a quiet insistence that life could be guided gently, with care, and with attention to the smallest details. In that rhythm, Lance felt the continuity of Gray Harbor, a living thread connecting past and present. The fog began to creep back in as the evening settled, softening the edges of buildings and boats. The town below quieted, lamps glowing in windows, shutters drawn against the cool breeze. Lance leaned against the railing, letting the steady glow of the lantern fill his eyes and the warmth settle over him. The harbor moved around him, slow and patient, and he felt a deep, unspoken gratitude for being part of it all. Gray Harbor, with its soft tides, whispering fog, and patient light, carried the weight of its stories quietly. Lance Wheeling, its keeper, sat watching, understanding that some things, like the rhythm of the sea, the steady glow of the lantern, and the small acts of care, were timeless. And in that understanding, he found a profound, enduring calm. Chapter 6. Currents of the Town. The morning fog had lifted, leaving Gray Harbor bathed in a soft, muted sunlight that glimmered off the water like scattered silver coins. Lance Wheeling walked along the pier, feeling the damp wood beneath his boots and inhaling the salty, crisp air. The harbor moved around him in its gentle rhythm, boats swaying softly against the docks, gulls wheeling lazily above, and the distant hum of the mill blending with the quiet lapping of waves against the shore. The town itself stirred slowly, each sound deliberate and measured. A wooden cart rumbled along the main street, carrying barrels of flour from the mill. Children's laughter drifted across the harbor as they chased one another through the shallow pools left by the receding tide. Somewhere, a blacksmith hammered steadily, the rhythmic clang punctuating the calm air like a heartbeat. Lance paused to watch the scene, his hands resting on the railing of the pier. He had grown used to this measured tempo, the way life in Gray Harbor moved gently, yet persistently. It reminded him of the sea itself, always flowing, always changing, but never rushed. By mid-morning, Elsie Harper arrived with a small basket of herbs in a folded blanket. She smiled as she approached. "Good morning, Lance," she said softly. "The harbor looks peaceful today." "Yes," he replied, watching a small fishing boat bob against the pier. "It's a quiet rhythm today, though the tide seems stronger than usual." She nodded and spread the blanket on a nearby bench, setting down the herbs. They rarely spoke for long. Their connection formed more through shared moments than conversation. Today she simply sat nearby, keeping him company as he inspected the docked boats and scanned the horizon. Lance's eyes followed the movements of the harbor, noting the subtle currents beneath the waves and the gentle rise and fall of the tide. Every detail mattered, the way the light reflected on the water, the sound of wind brushing against wooden planks, the small shadows cast by the masts of moored ships. These observations, meticulous yet intimate, formed the rhythm of his day. By mid-afternoon, the town's activities had fully awakened. A group of fishermen returned with small catches, their nets dripping with water and glistening in the sun. The baker rolled out dough on his wooden counter, sending the faint aroma of fresh bread across the streets. Lance paused to watch it all, sensing the quiet harmony between the harbor and the town. Everything was connected, the people, the sea, the light, and it moved with a gentle inevitability that he had come to cherish. He returned to the lighthouse to tend the lantern, polishing the glass and checking the wicks, ensuring the light would stretch far across the harbor come evening. The work was methodical, almost meditative, and Lance allowed himself to be fully present in the task. He felt the pulse of Gray Harbor in every polished surface, every carefully measured drop of oil, and every flicker of flame that would soon pierce the gathering dusk. As evening approached, the fog began to return, softening the edges of buildings, boats, and people alike. Lance climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room, observing the subtle changes in light as the sun dipped behind the cliffs. The harbor shimmered with golden hues, each wave catching a fraction of color before letting it go again, a slow, unbroken dance that mirrored the life of the town below. Lighting the lantern, Lance watched the glow expand steadily, casting long reflections on the water. The fog rolled in gently, wrapping the harbor in a cool, silvery blanket. From his perch, he could see the entire town settle into its nightly rhythm. Lamps glimmered faintly in windows, shutters closed one by one, and the occasional sound of footsteps on wooden planks drifted up from the streets below. He opened his journal, recording details of the tide, the patterns of fog, and the subtle movements of boats. His notes were precise yet lyrical, capturing not just what he saw, but how the harbor felt in those fleeting, calm moments. Each observation was a thread connecting him to Gray Harbor's past, present, and future, a gentle reminder that the town, like the sea, was patient and enduring. Night fell fully, and the harbor embraced its quiet solitude. Lance leaned on the railing, letting the lantern's amber glow warm his face. The town slept beneath the soft blanket of fog. The sea whispered against the rocks, and the small pulse of light remained constant, a steadfast sentinel in a gentle, unhurried world. Here, in the rhythm of the tides and the calm of evening, Lance Wheeling understood the quiet magic of Gray Harbor. Life moved with care, patience, and attention to detail, and in that rhythm, he found a profound, unbroken peace.